There's a moment 30,000 feet above the earth when the world below feels impossibly far away, like nothing bad could ever reach you up here. But that's a lie. Learned that the hard way. 1 second, you're sipping ginger ale, watching clouds drift by, and the next, the cabin is screaming with alarms, oxygen masks dropping like nooses, and the floor shudders beneath your feet. You think you're safe, strapped in, surrounded by strangers and steel, but the truth is, the sky doesn't care who you are. It can turn on you in an instant. After you hear these stories, you'll never look at flying the same way again. Some people never made it back from their flights. Others did, but they wish they hadn't. And if you think you know what real fear feels like, just wait. The worst is still to come. I used to love flying. There was something about the hum of the engines, the way the world shrank beneath you, that made everything feel possible. That day I was on Flight 217, a routine trip from Denver to Seattle. I'd done it a dozen times before. Window seat, headphones in, a paperback I'd probably never finish. The plane was packed, but everyone seemed relaxed, lost in their own little worlds. I remember the flight attendant's smile as she handed me a cup of coffee. The way the sunlight flickered through the window, painting patterns on the tray table, it was all so ordinary, so safe. We'd been in the air for about an hour when I first noticed something was off. It was subtle at first, a faint vibration under my feet like the plane was shivering. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. The guy next to me was snoring, mouth open, oblivious. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just turbulence, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The engine sounded different too, less like a steady roar, more like a strained whine, as if the plane was struggling against something invisible. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." His words were meant to reassure, but they did the opposite. I could hear the tension in his voice, the way he paused just a second too long before saying minor. My heart started to race. I looked out the window, searching for something, anything, that would make this feel normal again. But all I saw were endless clouds, thick and gray, swallowing the horizon. The lights flickered overhead, just once, but enough to make people glance up, uneasy. The flight attendants moved quickly, their smiles gone, whispering to each other in the galley. I caught snippets, hydraulics, manual override, emergency checklist. My palms were slick with sweat. I tried to focus on my breathing, counting the seconds between each shudder of the plane. The air felt thinner, colder, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. Suddenly the plane lurched, not the gentle dip of turbulence, but a violent jolt that sent drinks flying and passengers gasping. The oxygen masks dropped with a mechanical hiss, dangling in front of our faces like grotesque ornaments. For a moment, no one moved. Then panic erupted, people fumbling with the masks, crying, praying. I forced mine over my mouth, the rubbery smell filling my lungs. My ears popped painfully as the plane began to descend, faster than I'd ever felt before. The captain's voice came again, this time strained and urgent. "Brace for impact. Heads down. Stay calm." The words echoed in my skull, gripped the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. The world outside was a blur of gray and white, clouds spinning past the window. I thought of my family, of all the things I'd never get to say. The cabin was chaos, screams, prayers, the sound of metal groaning as the plane fought against gravity. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went eerily quiet. The engine sputtered, then died. We were gliding, powerless, through the clouds. I could see the ground now, endless forests, dark and unbroken, stretching for miles. There was no sign of civilization, no roads or lights, just a sea of trees waiting to swallow us whole. The last thing I remember is the sound of branches snapping, metal tearing, and the sickening jolt as we hit the ground. Then nothing, just darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, the cabin was silent, twisted wreckage all around me. Smoke hung in the air, thick and choking. I could hear distant cries, but they faded quickly, swallowed by the forest. My phone was dead. The emergency beacon smashed. No one came. To this day, I don't know how many of us survived. I wandered the woods for hours, maybe days, before I was found. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the sound of that engine dying, the silence that followed. And I wonder what really happened out there, in the darkness. Some questions, I think, are better left unanswered. Most people can accept a mechanical failure, a broken part, a human mistake, a tragic accident. It's terrifying, but at least it makes sense. But not every crash has a logical explanation. Sometimes what happens in the sky can't be traced to wires or engines or weather. Sometimes the real horror is something you can't see or fix. The next story isn't about what went wrong with the plane. It's about what was sitting right beside me, and the feeling that some things are never meant to be explained. I've always been a nervous flyer. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened on Flight 903. It was supposed to be a quick hop from Chicago to Boston. It's just under 2 hours in the air. I'd booked a window seat, hoping the view would distract me from my usual anxiety. But when I boarded, I found someone already sitting in my spot, a pale, thin man with sunken eyes and a faded gray suit. He didn't look up as I approached, just stared straight ahead, hands folded neatly in his lap. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond, not a blink, not a twitch. The flight attendant came over, checked my ticket, and gently asked the man to move. He finally turned, his eyes meeting mine for a split second. They were the coldest eyes I've ever seen, empty, almost translucent. Without a word, he slid over to the aisle seat, and I squeezed past him, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The plane took off without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man in 12B sat perfectly still, never speaking, never even glancing out the window. I tried to ignore him, but every so often I'd catch him watching me from the corner of his eye. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, too smooth, too deliberate, like he was mimicking what a person should do. About halfway through the flight, I started to feel off. My skin prickled, and the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on my chest. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, serving drinks and snacks, their smiles a little too forced. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words swam on the page. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought I was imagining it. "Don't look down." I froze. The voice was right next to my ear, but when I turned, the man in 1B was staring straight ahead, his lips pressed in a thin line. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, nerves playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Don't look down. Not yet." My heart hammered in my chest. I pressed the call button, desperate for any distraction. The flight attendant arrived, but before I could say anything, the man in 1B turned to her and whispered something I couldn't hear. She nodded, her face suddenly pale, and hurried away without another word. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. The plane hit turbulence, sudden and violent. The lights flickered, and the cabin filled with the sound of rattling trays and nervous laughter. But the man in 1B didn't move. He just stared at me, unblinking, as if he was waiting for something. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting the seconds, praying for it to end. When I opened them, the world had changed. The cabin was dark, the windows black as pitch. The other passengers were gone, every seat empty except for mine and his. I tried to stand, but my body wouldn't move. The man leaned in close, his breath icy on my cheek. "It's time," he whispered. Look down. Against my will, I glanced out the window. There was no sky, no clouds, just a swirling void, endless and hungry. I felt myself falling, tumbling through darkness, the plane dissolving around me. I screamed, but no sound came out. And then just as suddenly I was back in my seat. The cabin was bright, the passengers chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. The man in 12B was gone. The flight landed safely, and no one seemed to remember the turbulence, the darkness, or the empty seats. But I remember. I still see that void when I close my eyes, and sometimes, late at night, I hear a whisper in the dark. Don't look down. It's one thing to survive a crash you can explain, a broken engine, a storm, a mistake. But what if the real danger is something you can't see, something that follows you home? If you thought that was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened on this doomed flight. The next story isn't just about survival, it's about what's waiting for you when you think you're finally safe. I never wanted to be on that plane. It was a last-minute charter, a 6-seater propeller job meant to cut ours off our drive through the Rockies. There were 4 of us, me, my older brother, his best friend, and the pilot, a gruff man named Harris, who barely spoke. The weather was clear when we took off, the sky a deep, endless blue. I remember thinking how small the world looked from up there, the mountains like jagged teeth tearing at the horizon. About an hour in, the wind picked up. The plane rattled and dipped, the engines straining against invisible currents. Harris muttered something under his breath, eyes flicking nervously to the instrument panel. My brother tried to joke about it, but his voice was tight, his knuckles white on the armrest. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the clouds thicken and swirl, swallowing the sun. Then, without warning, the world dropped out from under us. The plane lurched violently, a deafening bang echoing through the cabin. Alarms blared. Harris shouted, wrestling with the controls. I saw the mountains rushing up to meet us, snow and rock and pine blurring together. My brother grabbed my hand, his eyes wide with terror. "Hold on," he yelled, but the words were lost in the roar. We hit the ground hard. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and for a moment all I knew was pain and cold and the taste of blood in my mouth. When I came to, the world was silent. The plane was a twisted wreck, half buried in snow. My brother was alive, dazed but moving. His friend was unconscious, a gash on his forehead. Harris was gone, thrown from the cockpit, his body lying motionless a few yards away. The cold was immediate, biting through our clothes, numbing our fingers and toes. We huddled together, using what little we could salvage from the wreck. Blankets, a half-empty thermos, a flare gun with 1 shot left. The radio was dead, the emergency beacon smashed. We were alone, miles from anywhere, surrounded by endless white and the looming silence of the mountains. At first we told ourselves someone would find us. Planes don't just disappear, right? But as the hours dragged on, hope faded. The sun dipped behind the peaks, and the temperature plummeted. The wind howled through the broken fuselage, carrying with it a strange, low moan that set my teeth on edge. My brother said it was just the wind, but I wasn't so sure. That night, as we tried to sleep, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow outside. Slow, deliberate, circling the wreck. I held my breath, listening. My brother heard it too. He squeezed my arm, eyes wide in the darkness. We whispered to each other, trying to convince ourselves it was just an animal, maybe a wolf or a bear. But the steps were too measured, too human. The next morning, we found tracks in the snow. Bare footprints, impossibly large, leading away from the plane and vanishing into the trees. My brother's friend woke up, delirious with fever, muttering about shadows moving in the woods. We tried to keep him calm, but he grew worse as the day wore on. His eyes darting to the windows, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "It's watching us," he said. "It's waiting." That night, the footsteps came back. Closer this time, circling tighter. I saw something move between the trees, a tall, thin shape, impossibly pale against the darkness. It didn't make a sound, just watched us with hollow, empty eyes. My brother fired the flare gun, the red light streaking across the snow, but when it faded, the thing was gone. We didn't sleep after that. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow seemed to move. My brother's friend slipped into unconsciousness, his breathing shallow and ragged. We argued about what to do, stay with the wreck, or try to hike out. In the end, the decision was made for us. The next morning, he was gone. No blood, no tracks, just an empty space where he'd been lying. We searched for him, calling his name until our voices were hoarse. But the only answer was the wind, and that low, mournful moan echoing through the trees. My brother and I knew we couldn't stay. We packed what little we had and started walking, following the footprints we'd seen before. The forest closed in around us, the silence pressing down like a weight. I don't remember how long we wandered. Time lost all meaning in that endless white. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes moving just out of sight, tall, pale figures slipping between the trees. Always watching, always waiting. My brother disappeared one night while I slept. I woke to find his footprints leading away from our camp, vanishing into the darkness. I called for him until my voice broke, but he never answered. I was alone then, the silence absolute. I don't know how I made it out. I remember stumbling through the snow, half mad with hunger and fear, until I saw the lights of a search party in the distance. They found me, frostbitten and raving, clutching a scrap of my brother's jacket. They said I was lucky to be alive. But I don't feel lucky. Sometimes, late at night, I hear that same low moan, and I see those hollow eyes watching me from the shadows. The mountains keep their secrets, and some things are better left lost in the silence. Maybe you've never thought twice about stepping onto a plane, trusting the metal, the math, the people in the cockpit, that after hearing these stories, it's hard not to wonder what really waits for us in the sky, or what's waiting when we come back down. There's something about flying that strips away our control, leaving us at the mercy of forces we can't see or understand. Sometimes it's a mechanical failure, sometimes it's something stranger, and sometimes it's the silence that follows, echoing long after the crash. If you've ever experienced something unsettling on a flight, something you can't explain, or a moment when you felt true fear, share your story in the comments. You never know who else might have seen or felt the same thing. And remember, the next time you buckle your seatbelt and watch the world fall away beneath you, not every flight ends with a safe landing. Some stories are still out there, circling above us, waiting for someone to listen.